Silas Thorne hadn't spoken to a soul in 6 months. The only thing that talked to him was the wind whistling through the gaps in his cabin logs in the dry, rhythmic thud of his axe against cedar. He liked it that way. Out here, in the jagged shadows of the Superstition Mountains, silence was a currency, and Silas was a wealthy man. He was 54, with skin like cured leather, and a back that carried the weight of a war nobody wanted to remember. He'd built this ranch on a patch of dirt God had forgotten to water, and he'd done it alone. He didn't want company. He didn't want trouble. But trouble doesn't knock. It stumbles. It was an hour before sundown when the horses picked up their ears. Silas felt it before he saw it. That shift in the air that happens right before a storm or a tragedy. He set down his axe and reached for the Winchester, leaning against the porch rail. Then he saw her. She came out of the heat haze like a ghost searching for a body. She wasn't riding. She was dragging a horse by its bridle, her boots kicking up clouds of red dust that looked like dried blood in the fading light. On the back of that horse was a man, slumped over the pommel, his white shirt stained a deep, sickening purple. She collapsed 50 yards from the porch, hitting the dirt with a sound that made Silas's chest tighten, a hollow, final thud. She didn't scream. She didn't have the breath for it. She just looked up, her eyes wide, green and drowning in terror. "Please," she rasped, the word tearing through her throat like broken glass. "I'll do anything you want. Just save her." Silas stared at her. It wasn't the blood on her dress that caught his attention. It wasn't the desperation in her voice. It was the way she shielded the man on the horse, even as she fell, as if her own life was just a secondary thought. He'd seen that look once before. In Tennessee, 30 years ago, he'd walked away then. He took a breath, the scent of parched earth and incoming rain filling his lungs. He lowered the rifle. He didn't know it yet, but that was his first mistake. Silas was a man of action, not words. He didn't ask her name. He didn't ask who had done the shooting. He just stepped off the porch and caught the horse's lead. The man was young, maybe 20. His face was the color of wood ash, his breath coming in short, wet rattles. Silas recognized that sound. It was the sound of a man standing on the edge of a hole, waiting for the shove. He hauled the boy off the saddle. He was heavier than he looked, the dead weight of a man who's already halfway gone. Silas carried him into the cabin, his boots heavy on the floorboards. The woman followed, her movements frantic, her hands shaking so hard she could barely find the doorframe. He laid the boy on the long oak table, the same table where Silas ate his lonely meals in the dark. He lit a lantern. The yellow light flickered, dancing across the walls, making the shadows of the hanging herbs and dried meats look like reaching fingers. "Water," Silas said. It wasn't a question. The woman nodded, stumbling toward the bucket by the stove. She brought a dipper, her knuckles white. Silas ignored her. He took a pair of shears from his kit and cut away the boy's shirt. The wound was in the shoulder, just below the collarbone. It wasn't a clean hole. It was jagged, angry, the lead still buried deep against the bone. Is he gonna die?" she whispered. Silas didn't look up. "Everyone dies, ma'am. The question is whether he does it tonight on my table." He began to work. It was a slow, grim ritual. The smell of copper-scent blood began to fill the small room, mixing with the scent of the boiling water on the stove. Silas used a pair of long-nosed pliers he usually reserved for tack repair. He dug lead out of horses, and he dug lead out of men. The only difference was that the men usually complained more. This boy didn't make a sound. He just stared at the ceiling with eyes that didn't see. The woman sat in the corner, wrapped in an old wool blanket Silas had thrown at her. She watched his every move. Silas could feel her gaze. It was heavy, like a physical weight on his shoulders. "What's your name?" he asked after a long silence, his hand steady as he worked the pliers. "Clara," she said. "And him, that's Caleb. He's my brother." Silas paused for a heartbeat. There was a catch in her voice, a tremor. Most would think it was grief. But Silas had spent 12 years listening to the subtleties of the wilderness. To him, that tremor sounded like a lie. But he didn't say anything. He turned back to the boy. He felt the metal tip of the pliers click against something hard. The lead. He pulled it out. a flattened piece of silver-gray death. He dropped it into the water bucket with a clink. "He's lucky," Silas said, finally looking at her. "Missed a lung. Another inch and he'd be vulture feed." Clara let out a sob, a jagged sound that broke the stillness of the cabin. She moved toward the table, reaching out to touch the boy's forehead. "Thank you," she sobbed. "I told you, I'll do anything. I have money or I can work. I'll do whatever you ask." Silas wiped his hands on a bloodied rag. "I don't want your money, Clara, and I don't want your work. I just want to know who's chasing you." The room went cold, colder than the mountain air outside. Clara looked away. "Nobody," she whispered. "It was an accident, a misunderstanding at a camp down in the flats." Silas didn't believe her, but he was tired. The sun had finally dipped below the horizon, leaving the world in a bruised purple twilight. He felt the old ache in his hip, the one he'd carried since Gettysburg. "Go to sleep, Clara," he said, gesturing to the small cot in the corner. "The boy won't move till morning. We'll talk when the sun's up." He blew out the lantern. The cabin was plunged into a thick, suffocating darkness. Silas sat in his chair by the fire, his Winchester across his lap. He told himself he was keeping watch over the boy. He didn't realize he was actually the one being watched. What Silas Thorne didn't know was that he wasn't the hunter anymore. He was a prize. If you ever felt that cold realization in the pit of your stomach, that moment when you realized the person you trusted was the one holding the knife, then you know exactly what Silas was feeling in that dark cabin. But out here in the West, stories don't end when the lights go out. They only get bloodier. If you're sitting there wondering how Silas is going to get out of this without his gun, or who Clara really is, do me a favor. Take a sip of your coffee, settle in, and hit that subscribe button. We got a lot of trail left to cover. And trust me, the real fight hasn't even started yet. Now, let's get back to the shadows. Silas stood in the center of his cabin, the darkness pressing in on him. He felt naked without the weight of the Winchester. He felt old. He moved to the door. It was unlatched, swinging slightly in the night breeze. He stepped out onto the porch. The moon was high, casting a silver, skeletal light over the ranch. The corral was quiet. The horses were gone. "Clara?" he called out. His voice felt small in the vastness of the desert. "Over here, Silas." The voice came from the barn. It wasn't sobbing anymore. It was cool, steady, worn like leather. Silas walked toward the barn, his boots silent on the dust. He reached into his boot and pulled out a small hideout knife, a 3-inch blade he kept sharp enough to shave with. It wasn't much against a rifle, but it was something. He stepped into the barn. The scent of hay and horse sweat was thick. Clara was standing by the grain bin. She was holding his Winchester. Beside her, the dying boy Caleb was standing tall. He wasn't pale anymore. He was holding Silas's Colt .45, and he was holding it with a hand that didn't shake. The purple stain on his shirt wasn't blood. It was berry juice mixed with flour. A stage trick. "You look disappointed, Silas," Caleb said. His voice was deep, mocking. "And here I thought we were family. You saved my life, didn't you?" Silas looked at the boy, then at Clara. It wasn't the betrayal that hurt. It was the stupidity of his own hope. He'd wanted to believe in the girl from Tennessee again. He'd wanted to believe he could still save someone. "Who are you?" Silas asked. "Does it matter?" Clara said. She stepped forward, the rifle leveled at Silas's chest. "We heard about the man in the mountains, the one who walked away from the war with a chest full of Union gold. We've been looking for you for 3 weeks, Silas." "There's no gold," Silas said. Caleb laughed. It was a dry, ugly sound. "Everyone says that, right before they start digging. We're not going to kill you, Silas. At least, not yet. You're to show us where it is. And then, maybe, we'll leave you enough water to make it to the next town." "You went to a lot of trouble for a rumor," Silas said. "It wasn't just a rumor," a new voice said. From the shadows at the back of the barn, a third man stepped out. He was tall, thin, with a face that looked like it had been carved out of a canyon wall. He wore a duster that was coated in trail dust, and a badge was pinned to his vest. Sheriff Miller, a man Silas had served with, A man who knew exactly what was buried under that corral post. Silas, Miller said, nodding slowly. It's been a long time. Miller, Silas replied, I should have known. You were always better at stealing than scouting. The war ended, Silas. But the Bills didn't, Miller said. He looked at Clara and Caleb. You two did well. The dying brother act never fails. Pity is a powerful thing, isn't it? Silas looked at the three of them. He was surrounded, outgunned. His home was no longer a sanctuary. It was a cage. The gold is in the corral, Silas said, his voice flat. Under the third post. Take it and go. Miller smiled. See? I told you he was a practical man. Caleb, go get the shovels. Clara, keep that rifle on him. If he twitches, put a hole in him. He served his purpose. Caleb grabbed a shovel from the wall and headed out to the corral. Miller followed him, his eyes already gleaming with the thought of coins. Clara stayed in the barn, her finger on the trigger of the Winchester. She looked at Silas. For a second, just a flicker of a second, he saw something in her eyes. It wasn't a pity. It was fear. They're going to kill you anyway, you know, she whispered. I know, Silas said. I didn't want it to be like this, she said. But Miller, he has my son, back in Mesa. He said if I didn't help him, I'd never see him again. Silas looked at her. He didn't know if she was lying again. In the West, everyone has a story, and most of them are written in blood. Then you'd better make sure you don't miss Clara, Silas said. Suddenly, a scream ripped through the night air. It came from the corral. A high, shrill sound of pure agony. Clara flinched, her eyes darting toward the barn door. That was all Silas needed. He didn't run at her. He kicked a bucket of lice sitting by his feet, sending a cloud of white, stinging dust into the air. Clara coughed, her eyes watering, the rifle swinging wide. Silas was on her in 2 strides. He didn't use the knife. He grabbed the barrel of the Winchester and twisted. He used her own momentum to slam her against the grain bin. The rifle clattered to the floor. He didn't stop to check on her. He scooped up the Winchester and ran toward the corral. Outside, the scene was chaotic. Caleb was on the ground, clutching his leg. He hadn't been shot. He had been bitten. Silas didn't bury his gold under the third post. He buried his gold in the cellar of the cabin, under the third post of the corral. He'd buried something else, a nest of Mojave greens, the most territorial, ill-tempered rattlesnakes in the territory. He'd spent 2 years making sure that post stayed undisturbed, letting the snakes reclaim the cool, dark earth beneath it. Miller was standing 5 feet away, his gun drawn, but he was frozen. He was looking at the ground, where 3 more shadows were coiling in the dust. Don't move, Miller, Silas said, his voice like the crack of a whip. Miller looked up, the silver moonlight reflecting in his panicked eyes. He saw the Winchester in Silas's hands. Silas, help him, Miller pleaded, gesturing to Caleb, whose face was already beginning to swell. I'm done saving people, Miller, Silas said. I've had a long day, and I think it's time you left my land. You can't leave us out here. He needs a doctor. Then you better start riding, Silas said. He shifted the rifle, aiming at the dirt between Miller's feet. He fired once. The roar of the Winchester shattered the night. The snakes hissed, a dry, rhythmic warning. Miller didn't wait for a second shot. He hauled Caleb up, throwing the moaning boy over a horse. He scrambled into his own saddle, his face pale with a terror that no amount of gold could cure. He looked at Silas one last time, a look of pure, unadulterated hatred. Then he spurred the horse and disappeared into the blackness of the desert. The ranch was quiet again. Silas stood by the corral, the Winchester heavy in his hands. The snakes had retreated back into their hole, the earth settling over their secrets once more. He turned back to the barn. Clara was standing in the doorway. She wasn't holding a gun. She was just holding herself, her shoulders shaking. Go, Silas said. She looked at him, surprised. You're letting me leave? The horse is saddled, Silas said, pointing to the mare Caleb had been using. There's water in the canteen. If you hurry, you might catch up to them. Or you can head south. It's your choice. Clara stared at him for a long time. Why? Because, Silas said, looking up at the stars, I'd like to believe that somewhere in some version of this story, the girl in Tennessee made a home. She didn't say thank you. She didn't say goodbye. She just climbed into the saddle and rode. Silas watched her until the dust settled. He walked back to his cabin, his boots heavy. He picked up his axe and leaned it against the porch. He sat in his chair. The sun would be up in a few hours. He'd have to fix the grain bin. He'd have to check on the horses. He was alone again. The silence was back. But as he sat there in the dark, Silas realized something. The silence didn't feel heavy anymore. It felt clean. Out here in the West, people tell you that you are who you protect. They tell you that your life is measured by the things you save. But Silas knew better. Your life is measured by the things you refuse to let break you. So let me ask you something. If a stranger showed up at your door tonight, bleeding and broken, would you open it? Or would you remember the snakes under the post? Every story in the West is a gamble. Sometimes you win the gold. Sometimes you just win the right to see the next sunrise. If this story meant something to you, if it made you think about the choices we make when the light gets low, then do us a favor. Give this video a like. Share it with someone who appreciates a real tale from the trail. And don't forget to subscribe, because out here, the stories never truly end. They just keep riding into the sunset. Until next time, keep your eyes on the horizon and your hand on your heart. Take care of yourselves.